don't know how.
I haven't been to. Gee, I'm trying to think when was the last time.
Making more than that.
Well, I went to a Nutcracker years ago.
Good work if you can get it.
How's she?
But I just got him to retire. So.
Fine. I was over there
One
a
win.
couple of days ago, and she seemed
The last time.
But do you
last time I
get
saw her
up
was
to the
a couple years
podium?
ago.
or-
Usually we do when
about
we
just
make slides
about
instead
For
of saying.
this kind of thing? do
Yeah,
we
but
do that?
then
Well, that's, yeah,
after,
that's,
you know,
people that age, they
afterwards,
always
come
say that.
back and
They
then can answer any
find 3 or 4
questions
other things
sitting
to do.
down.
Hey, when I
If
said
they
I'm
start
gonna meet,
discussion, the mayor will usually say any, immediate questions. It's a
Not
work
quite that
session
age
for
yet,
the
though.
last question.
what is
Pretty
that
on the
age?
floor.
Yeah.
What's she gotta be
And
pushing
then
90?
discussion.
Peter?
I'm not gonna wait that long.
No, she and Peter gotta be
So do you
pushing,
got a
gotta
plan?
be over 85.
92.
Do you have a plan on laid
Gotta be
out?
pushing 90.
Well,
We
it's
have a
only
couple.
better.
Why am I not connected to the network?
How do you feel about it?
2 closets.
Oh, man, this drives me funky
Really?
bananas.
2 of the bedrooms are small also.
Yep. Do what you're told. Sometimes it's no fun.
Get this show on the
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call the regular work session, or excuse me, the joint work session for the Sierra Vista City Council for the 1st of May, 2018 to order. We won't need a roll call. I will mention we have one council member that called in and says she won't be here because of illness. And with that, we'll go on to the discussion of rate recycling and the recycling rates and charges. And with that, Mr. Patuchik, would you like to start the discussion, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of the council. The jointness of the work session is extending to Mr. Marty Haverty, the solid waste director from the county, who we invited today to go over some of the stats with regards to recycling. The purpose of the meeting today is essentially twofold, although they both affect the Refuse Enterprise Fund and what we'll be doing operationally and budgetarily next fiscal year with regards to refuse. First issue, as you're aware, staff is proposing a 15% increase in refuse rates, and we want to go over some background in terms of what that means and the reasoning behind that. And second, and also something that goes along with that is the status of the recycling program. And we want to take that from the county's perspective, since they're the ones that collect the recyclables and then sell them on the open market, through what it means to us potentially operationally with regards to the recycle program. So we'll have some options and recommendations for the council to consider there. Some historical context, over the last couple of decades, the city has been involved in an intergovernmental agreement with Cochise County to operate the solid waste transfer station, pickups, and the landfill. There are 6 cities in the county that are involved in this intergovernmental agreement, the exception being Wichita City. They have never participated in the intergovernmental agreement. So Sierra Vista has the preponderance of the refuse and also have the preponderance of the recycling, but the IGA is there to serve in the capacity of having all the communities in the county, except for Wichita City, working together on refuse. So at that time, a number of municipalities were running their own landfills, and of course the costs associated with that, as well as the environmental regulations, continued to be more and more of a problem for them, and it was determined at that time by all the entities that it would be best for the county to run the landfill operation. It would do so in a way that was environmentally sound, that met all permitting and environmental regulations and requirements. So that is essentially what we've been engaged in now over a number of years. So it's really kind of a shared system. It's governed by 2 entities primarily. There is a rate review advisory board, of which I currently chair, and that is made up of the city managers and the county administrator involved in in solid waste, and we meet probably on a quarterly basis to discuss budget, discuss operations, ways we can do things better, and then make finally a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors with regards to the setting of the tipping fees for the tonnage rates that are associated with dumping at the Western Regional Landfill. So we make those recommendations, the board then implements, and the council's role in all this is the establishment of rates for the pickup that we're responsible for. And all these costs and operations all fold together to eventually come down really to what the rates are being charged for our customers for solid waste. So with that, I'd like to have Mr. Marty Haverty get up and talk a little bit about what's going on at the county with regards to recycling. And then Mr. Felix and Ms. Flassar will talk a little bit more about the finances and operations associated with that. Please feel free to ask questions as we're going through, and then I'll pipe in when
Chuck, before we go to Marty, the other thing we do also that you didn't mention is we do have an intergovernmental agreement that is agreed to and passed by the council. It's not just setting of the rates.
Yes, you are a part of
And
that.
a copy of that should have been put in the email or in the read file yesterday or today. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Marty. Appreciate you being here.
And Marty used to work for us in Public Works, so he's pretty familiar with how we do things here. So
He knows where all the bodies are buried.
I don't know about that. Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's really a pleasure to be back in here. It's been probably 10 years since I've been here, so it's great to be back here. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the world recycling market, what I've been told, what I've researched, and what my staff's researched. But to start with, I want to talk about recycling with the county, the partnership with the county and City of Sierra Vista. It was probably 8.5 years ago that we combined resources, and the city started dispositing or giving us the recycling, and then we would take it and market it. During the 8.5 years, we've recycled about 47,000 tons, which saved us about 277 days, landfill days, that we'd have to be open and extend the life of the landfill. So it's been very beneficial, not only to the city of Sierra Vista because they tipped for free that material, but also to the county system. So it's been a great partnership. That's kind of turned on its ear in the past, 3 to 6 months. With China. China has really been rediscovering themselves, I guess you could say. They developed an EPA, and they started turning back loads that were very contaminated. They came out publicly and said we're really tired of being the world's dump. So a lot of brokers in the U.S. that are brokering loads over on ships going over get loads turned away now. And that increases cost for any recycling center, and also it decreases any profits, and they're passing those on to the actual recyclers. To the point right now where, let me flip through this if I can. Advance.
Do the arrow on the keyboard?
Right here?
Yeah. Right there.
Okay. This chart right here, hopefully you can see the yellow line. But this is the revenue we've been excuse me, we've been receiving over this period of time. Before this July 2016, we were well above the $50 a ton. It was actually above the $53 a ton. Basically, when the city of Sierra Vista and anyone else drops recycling on us at the Sierra Vista transfer station, we then transport it up to the material recycling facility in Tucson. We incur costs of $53 a ton. Those costs include all of our transfer station costs, all of our trucking costs, and our administration costs. So we're at 53. As you can see on this chart, revenue has been well below that for quite some time. But before that, we were well above. We used a rolling average to where we saw that we needed to recover some of those costs from any contributor to the recycling stream. Thus, that's where Sierra Vista stepped in and started paying the 53 to pay our costs. You can see on the chart, going probably in the last, well, since the first of the year. We've been zeroed out. We haven't received any revenue from Recommunity, who's our recycler. So we've been charging $53 a ton to recover the system cost. It's not so much to the county, but it's for the benefit for the other cities that are members of the Review Advisory Board and the IGA and the consortium that we have. So during this time, these revenues have completely flattened out. Yes, ma'am.
Could you say a little bit more about that since Sierra Vista started paying the $53 a ton?
Yeah, Sierra Vista started paying $53 a ton, I believe it was in February.
How did that benefit the system?
It paid for the system's costs to get the material up to Tucson. And it recovered those costs that we incurred to get the material to Tucson.
And I understand that Sierra Vista is the largest user of the facility. So were the other communities, did they pay anything at all
Well, the other
because of that increase?
This is only for commingled recycling, and the other communities don't have commingled recycling systems in place. Sierra Vista has about 97% of that recycling stream that we're taking up there. The other part is done by drop-off recycling and some private haulers that have came in and taken business from Sierra Vista within the community. That 3% makes up drop-off recycling and also those private haulers that are depositing. The private haulers that are dropping off the amount, the other part of that 3%, they pay the 53 as well. They pay the same costs. And also the Board of Supervisors, mainly because these other are all drop-off and they're community drop-offs around the county at 16 different locations. The Board of Supervisors picks up the tab for the $53 a ton for the rest of that.
Okay, so we have some private haulers that also pay a $53 tipping fee to the landfill,
To the system, yes.
to the system. And what is the commingled? What is that?
Commingled is basically the material in the blue bin that we allow people to recycle. It's all the different things and it's all mixed up. So it's called commingle in the industry.
Okay.
That's the stuff that's not sorted. In other places, you have a bin for aluminum, a bin for steel, a bin for paper, a bin for, so those, that would be sorted. And
But
this is
not in the
commingled.
county?
Well, no, and here we don't do it either.
Okay.
Yeah, in the
Nobody
county,
else in the county?
Yeah.
Across the entire county.
Okay.
and no other city in the county does a program similar to yours. Yours has been very successful, helping you guys out, save tipping fees and whatnot. So economically, it's been really good until just recently. And the other communities have chosen not to do that. A lot of people throughout the county at our 16 different locations, they'll utilize our drop-off sites and commingle and drop it into a large container and mix it all up, and then we'll take it up to Tucson and try to market it, but right now there's no market.
Thank you.
Sir?
How does, so when people drop off at if they're not in Sierra Vista and they're in one of the other communities and they're just utilizing the drop-off points, when those materials are collected, do they go up in the same trucks that the county sends up to the recycling drop-off point?
Yeah, they do.
So Sierra Vista contributes 97% within the system that is through the intergovernmental agreement. That's what we're counting. 3% is drop-off. But how much are the other communities contributing to the total haul of recycled materials that are being taken up to the recycling points?
Because we can't track that and because there's so many rural people outside the city limits that are using those drop-offs, 10 of those 16 sites are actually out in the rural areas, unincorporated areas that we have this. So the only fair way we could look at having this cost recovery would be through the Board of Supervisors pitching in and helping out through half-cent sales tax and providing payment and cost recovery to the system for that 3% or 2%, maybe 1.5%. I can't really remember the private haulers percentage.
Yeah, essentially, the board is picking up the remainder. Bisbee has its own program and tries to keep it separated and clean. It's a very inconsequential amount to the overall system. So since we do 97% of that, we've had to bear the brunt of the costs associated now with recycling. For 8 years, essentially, recyclables made money, and we
Right.
benefited by having a zero tipping fee. When that started changing, the county then and the system had to charge Sierra Vista for the recyclables because they were no longer covering the cost that were associated with it. And the others is so inconsequential that the Board of Supervisors has determined to pick up those costs.
And then they're so spread out over the county. It's not just the other 5 cities. They're spread out over 10 different rural sites, so.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand here is the math. So we've got roughly, 150,000 people in the county, give or take, on a good day. And then we've got
Probably less than
40,000 people here in the city, give or take, on a good day if we count the fort. So what I'm trying to figure out is if we're 97% of what is being sorted and then hauled, where is all of their potential recycling for the other 2/3 of the county? Where is that going and who's paying for that to get shipped up? And I'm talking before the market collapse, but who was picking up the bill for all of that?
For the 3%?
Well, that assumes that nobody else in the county is recycling other than 3% of.
Well, I think what they're telling you is that the majority of what should be recycled outside the county isn't being recycled. It's going through the normal trash stream.
Is that what we're saying very clearly?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so nobody else is recycling to the capacity that we are, and we're 97% of the total recycling.
Yeah, you guys have the best program in the county, in southern Arizona by far. Bisbee has a little program, as Chuck referred to, and they do some source separation, some baling at their site, but you guys are the only ones that really commingle and really recycle.
All right,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
That answers my question.
But- Okay, so as you can see, revenues are up and down. In the past, they've been up. We use a rolling average. Once we got into where we weren't recovering costs over the long term, that's when we came to the rate review board and talked about the system trying to recover the costs that we were incurring. So that's where we're at there. The third and last slide, Sierra Vista recycles roughly 2,000 tons a year. And Sharon may have some better numbers on that when she talks to it. But what I wanted to do was, when we take it up to the recycling facility up in Tucson, every once in a while, they'll do an audit on it. They'll spill it on the ground, and they'll kick around and go through it, weigh everything, and see what percentage is what. On this, one of the most concerning things, and one of the most concerning things to the recycling facility up there, is the amount of trash and residue within the waste stream, or the recycling stream, and that's 23%. So almost 1/4 of what goes into the bins is non-allowable. It's something that we don't have on the list, and that also drives up costs because they have to sort it out, for one, and the other thing is they need to make it cleaner than they did before, so they had to add a second shift to the sort line, and so they're working well into the night. They had to slow down their lines to get the trash removed, and then they have disposal costs on top of that. So that creeps down on anything that we do have a value in there, being able to be marketable and having some revenue coming back. We had a meeting, Chuck and Sharon, and we talked to the guy that manages the recycling facility up in Tucson, and he told us that paper is basically invaluable, that you can't sell it now. So 34% of that's paper. So you combine the two there without getting in the weeds, and you can look at this pie chart, and you can see that over half of what we put into the bins right now is unacceptable and can't be used, and it really drives up the costs and drives down the revenues that we receive. So, we're really in a kind of we have issues, we have challenges with this, but at the same time, there may be some opportunity, and I think Sharon may talk about some of those opportunities and where we may go from here, as not only your community, but as the county, and how we manage the system. And one of them would be starting to eliminate what we're putting into the recycling bins. We feel like if we can do that long term and really clean the trash out of this, get the paper out of it, We'll have a different mix of recycling. But if you guys don't have any other questions, I can turn it over to Sharon, and she can kind of walk through some of the options, or Dave, or wherever you want to go, Chuck. And
All right, thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Marty.
yeah, you bet.
So basically, because of what's happened in terms of demand for recyclables and the way we do recycle, which was actually a very cost-effective way of doing it, we have probably good-meaning people in the community that probably feel we should be recycling more materials or other materials than we are. Those end up in the blue bins as well, and it turns out that they're not marketable at all, and as Marty said, needs to be sorted out, which drives up the cost. And then the other is, over a third of the recycling is paper products, and now they're completely worthless on the open market. So over 50% now of our recycling really has no value at all, and that is something we need to address. It's a cost factor to us and to the entire system. So Dave's going to go through some of the background on the financial part, and then we'll turn it over to Sharon to look at some of the operational aspects and recommendations.
Okay, Mayor, members of council. First off, I've incorporated a couple things from the last presentation we did based off comments and questions that came up. Some information on the actual agreement, the IGA, some questions were asked on that, and then some questions in regards to the tipping fees and some comparisons on privatization and things like that. First off, I want to say is I know Marty's here to talk about the recycling aspect of it, but again, that is only one of the pieces of the puzzle in which we're dealing with as far as the importance of the fund itself. Just as a reminder, to kind of review for anyone who had missed it before, the refuse fund, like the sewer fund, are both enterprise funds, both for the city and the county. The county operates that as an enterprise fund as well. And it borrows money when it's short from the county itself, and it owes the county some money. No taxes support this. When sales tax goes up, it does not support the fund at all. Cost to that fund, the front desk processing the bills, my staff processing the bills, your time discussing this is charged out to that fund as a cost of the fund. And so those fees then have to cover the operations of the fund. The last rate change was back in 2014 rather, when we reduced the rates $1 because of the success in going to the curbside recycling. And since it's obviously been 4 years since we've been discussing rates, the recycling with the fees and the revenue that the county has been getting has obviously been very successful for us and a great benefit to all members of the system. To kind of go back to the history of the IGA, back in 1990, prior to 1990, the city was dumping at the Huachuca City landfill. That's at least from what I've been told with how it worked. The fort still dumps there, other entities still dump there. But the council approved developing a county-wide system for a solid waste management. In '92, they designated the system as the sole place that the city's refuse will go. In '92, the city council adopted a 15-year IGA to be a part of the attorney. Last year, the city renewed the IGA with the county. There were some questions about opting out. It's a 5-year term. At the end of 5 years, if we don't do anything, we'll automatically review for another 5 years. If the city wishes to get out, it must give a 180-day written notice to get out of the agreement. A couple key conditions. The city agrees, yes, that's how it's written, that all solid waste is committed to the system for the terms of the agreement. If we decide to transfer out on our own and not be part of it, then we have to get approval from them for doing that. We have to get approval from the county to do that. Now, if we decide not to do that, well, before I get there, now the rates are set by the advisory board. And it says, Chuck described how the advisory board works, and they only recommend the fees But as you can see from the agreement you have, the paramount goal of the board is to maintain the solvency of the system. And that's what they've been trying to do over time, balancing that with the effect on the cities. Now, the board can adopt whatever fee they want, but they're also supposed to adopt a rate that ensures the solvency of the system. Now, as we can see over time, and this is part of the reason we've held off on the rates, is the county's been working to try and reduce their costs. They've been looking at obvious other options. As some of you remember, they were looking at privatizing. They went through various steps to try and mitigate their costs. Part of this was the recycling that they were doing to try and extend the life of the landfill. So as you can see over time, the costs to the landfill have gone up significantly because of their cost of operations. If the city wishes to leave this agreement with the county, it has to go to arbitration, and the city can still end up paying to make everybody else in the system whole, since all the other entities depend on every member to be part of it to set the rates. Now, in comparison to other landfill rates,
Dave, could you go back to that other slide? Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the rates that you see reflected there, particularly since '09, those rates probably should have been higher, and the Board of Supervisors was subsidizing the landfill rates to the point where it got to be where the system owed the county, I think it was $2.3 million, I believe is the number. And a couple of years ago, the board approached us and said, you know, we want to see this turned around. We want to get paid back. We need to make sure that the system is solvent. So that it resulted in the $64 a ton tipping fee that we currently have. And we have seen positive results from that, and the financial picture for the system has turned around dramatically, and now the board is being paid back as a result of that. So we're seeing that turned around, but rates probably should have been higher prior to that to stop that trend. But the other cities were not really that interested in that at the time.
When will the county be whole?
At the rate we're going right now, Mr. Mayor, I would say it would be about a 7-year payback period. Mm-hmm.
I think what I still don't understand is what the other cities are paying.
They're paying the same thing. Mm-hmm.
This is the tipping fees that every city.
Yes.
Okay, now I really don't understand because we have the bigger part of the garbage.
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it.
we do not get a volume discount.
Also at that time, we undertook an effort to try and privatize the transfer station, the hauling, and the landfill operation, and put out a request for information, working together with the county. That proved to be fruitless because we received no interest in that particular request for information. We were able to talk to one of the potential vendors after the process was completed, and indicated to us that two things were working against us. One, the amount of refuse that is generated in Cochise County is not enough to make privatization possible, at least at that time. And the other are the sheer distances involved in transferring and hauling the refuse probably to Tucson as a result. So we were not successful in that effort at that time. Yes, Craig.
I have just a quick question. Maybe because there's a couple different subjects that we're talking about here. So we're talking about the recycling market, which I'm sure we can talk more about all day long. But you mentioned that the tipping fees, and I think you said 2009 probably should have been a little bit higher, and the county was subsidizing those. And then we've seen an escalation with those fees so that the county can recoup some of the
Subsidy,
liability,
yeah.
the subsidy that was there.
Yes.
So I guess my first question is, if the recycling program, we realized the recycling program was working, but if it was working, then why would the tipping fees still had to continue to increase to offset the subsidy?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
And I do have an answer, actually. But it has to do with what I want to say, paradoxical situation that is involved in the refuse business. Refuse business is one that the more refuse you have, the better off you are, because you generate more revenue in terms of tipping fees as a result of having more. So that's and the costs associated with opening new landfill cells and that kind of thing. And at the time, 8.5 years ago, when we entered into this zero tipping fee arrangement, it was a huge benefit to us because the county was making money on bills. We were saving on the tipping fee, and we were also saving in landfill space. And that's what, over the last 3 to 6 months, has totally flipped around on us.
So we were using the revenue from recycling to kind of offset some of those costs.
It was recycling, the costs associated with recycling, but also it was accruing positively to the system for the longest time as well.
I'll have a follow-on question here in a minute, but I know you want to finish up with your presentation.
And kind of tying with that, got some comparison landfill rates from around the state. And as you can see, we are by far the highest tipping fee, and Pima County is the second highest, which is obviously a lot of others, except for Flagstaff, are all in the valley area. So as Chuck mentioned, volume business. So you've got the Salt River Indian Community, Gila County, the Glendale area, noticeably less than us. Obviously, the closest rate to us is the Pima County rate at only $45 a ton. So we're almost 50% more than that to try and recover the costs and bring things whole. Obviously, which kind of plays into the next one for comparison to city rates. So as you can see, even though we are, go back to this to Tucson, double Tucson's rate for our tipping fee, Tucson's pretty close to our refuse rate. So as far as our operations go, as you can see in this comparison chart, our staff is doing a very good job considering the cost of our tipping fees compared to what these other areas do. So we already run an efficient operation. If we had the similar tipping fees, I think we'd be much more competitive in this chart. But comparing to some of the other ones, Mesa, Goodyear, Glendale, some of these have some pretty noticeable fees given, as you saw from the prior chart, their tipping fees are noticeably less than ours.
One other point I want to make regarding that chart is it's hard to compare apples and oranges sometimes because some of the entities use outside revenue sources to support their systems. Tucson, most notably, I think they've recently now changed to pure enterprise, but before they had other tax sources that were involved, particularly property tax, to help offset the cost.
That was my point, is I believe that there's some subsidies and some other things that probably go into that.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're efficient, but
Ours are not
much larger
subsidized.
governmental organizations with other fees and costs and revenue streams that are coming in and out.
Now, there's talk of privatization, too. We've got 4 different bills from 4 different people in the county, and as you can see, rates vary greatly. Somebody called up and complained about it, and they got a lowered rate from just calling up the person to complain about it. For a 65-gallon can, here's our annual difference that we're looking at for $27 for the year. For 95, it's $31. The cheapest county person that I've seen the bill for to privatize would be a $155 increase per year for the residents. And that $135 and $145 fee, those are neighbors. Those two people live right next door to each other. And so you can see $10 per quarter, $3 a month difference in their rates, and they live next door to each other. So other than somebody not calling in, somebody not talking to it, this is how the privates, and they can, and understand too that for whatever reason, history of the state, water, gas, and electricity have to go to the ACC to get rates approved and changed. Refuse, under state law, is not considered a utility and does not fall under the ACC for rate reviews. So the private haulers can change at their will.
And one more point of information before Council Member Calhoun asks her question. But what's particularly interesting about the rate differences between what we charge and what is charged by the private haulers in the county is they have the option to tip wherever they want. They can choose to tip at Huachuca City for far less cost. They can choose to haul to Tucson, or they could choose to tip with us. Obviously, with the county system, that's a higher tipping fee, so they're probably going to one of the alternative places to tip. So they're taking advantage of a lower tipping fee, yet charging basically double to 3 times the amount that our residents are charged for solid waste pickup. So it's a profitable business when you do that.
I have a couple of questions based on, excuse me, Mayor.
Go ahead, please.
First of all, David, I had to ask you, did you tell those two neighbors about the differences in their rates?
I'm actually the one person who brought it to my attention. They were talking to each other, and that's how they found out about it.
Oh, okay.
One of them is an employee here.
I was just curious what trouble you started in
I didn't-
some neighborhood. Just kidding. About the choice of using landfills, I understand that we have made our decision to stay with the county, but what's the difference in the county's landfill and Huachuca City's landfill?
Well, Marty can probably answer that better than me, but I'll take a stab at it first. Mayor Mueller, members of council, Councilmember Calhoun, essentially, the landfill that the county operates on behalf of the system is a state-of-the-art facility. It is lined, it meets all regulatory environmental standards, which includes lining the landfills, the monitoring, the catching of leachate, those kind of things. Huachuca City operates a grandfathered landfill that offers none of the environmental protections associated with landfilling that the county system has. As such, those that are using the Huachuca City landfill potentially bear the liability associated with cleanup if that situation ever occurs. That is highly unlikely to occur at the county landfill site.
And the Post uses Huachuca City?
The Post still uses Huachuca City. We've tried to work with the Post for a number of years. Colonel Boone, I think, was here and probably could address it better than me. But when the Post went with Michael's Military Housing under contract, then Michael's was free then to contract with Sierra Vista for the hauling of solid waste, and then we started picking up on Post for that. But all other refuse has been going to Huachuca City.
As far as the rate difference, I do not know that. I don't know if Marty knows the rate difference or Sharon.
Between Huachuca City and, it varies with commercial haulers. They can go down to $32 a ton. For the normal public, they go about 55, 50 in that range.
So 32 versus 65. And if you have no other questions for me,
Thank you, David.
SAR's up next.
All right, good afternoon, mayors, members of the council. I'll talk with you a little bit about the operational aspect of the recycling program. First off, Marty touched on this briefly in his presentation, but these are the changes we saw come out of China effective January 1st. Key points here are the banning of the import of 24 different types of solid waste, among them unsorted paper products. That was the 34% mixed paper that Marty had noted in his slide. And then some big words there, which are basically your number 3 through 7 plastics. Although Sierra Vista doesn't currently accept those in its recycling stream, we do 1 and 2 plastics. We have been getting a lot of inquiries from the public on 3 through 7 plastics, and that's them right there. And then also, very key at the bottom, the contamination rate that China is looking for on imported recyclable materials, 0.5%.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but I'm just curious about a lot of this, but I'm curious about the agreement that the United States originally had with China about, now I don't expect you to have that in your,
that would be a tall order right there.
But, and I'll probably say a little bit more about this a little later, but do you have any knowledge of that original, and did we agree at some time to, because I'm going to call President Trump, and when he talks to China, I'm going to talk to him about clarifying this a little bit, but so I'm just curious as what our original agreement and understanding about recycling was, and did we have any sort of understanding or agreement with our guy in Tucson or anybody about the kinds of stuff that we would put in our recycling?
This is all market-based.
Yeah, off the top of my head, and I'd have to do some more research, so that's my disclaimer. I'm not sure that the U.S. government was really that involved in that, because essentially at the time, China was looking for raw materials for their own purposes, and entered into agreements with private resellers and marketers here in the United States, who were then shipping the product over, and then they were making use of it. And for whatever reason, be it a sudden environmental awakening, or just simply maybe not needing the recyclables anymore for the products that they made, they have made this determination to stop accepting these materials. Now, we'll get into this a little bit, but certain materials, yes, they still have value, and we'll talk about that, but they need to be clean, meaning they need to be separated. They need to be in a package that's acceptable to them to take that. And we'll start getting into that here in just a little bit with Sharon's presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
And it is important to note here that the 0.5%, that doesn't mean that we have to get the blue bin from 24% contamination down to 0.5. When it gets to the recycling processing facility, it runs through a variety of machines there. But in order to achieve that 0.5%, they have to run it through the machine multiple times. They have to get it far cleaner than they used to have to get it to ship it to China in order for it to have any market value and for it to not be turned back around at the port as too dirty. So some of the local challenges, number one, the writing is somewhat on the wall in terms of the fact that some of the things we are currently recycling just have no value on the market. I've kind of adopted the phrasing here lately of saying they're worse than garbage, and the reason for that is rather than being dumped directly at the local landfill, they're being hauled up to ReCommunities in Tucson at a cost of $53 per ton. And when those items such as paper products make up more than 34% of our recycling stream, you can see how we are losing a lot of money by continuing to haul those items with no value up to ReCommunities. Contamination rates, obviously, we need to find a way to do better on contamination rates overall. through additional education and possibly auditing of blue bins. And then just clear that providing recycling collection is going to be more expensive than in the past. Costs are going up. They're going up not just nationwide, but worldwide. We're not the only ones dealing with this problem. Communities across the country are grappling with this same reality right now.
It's the world.
Across the world, that's correct. Europe is also struggling with this. Their recyclables are much the same as ours, with roughly comparable contamination rates. So here's where we get into the accepted recyclables, current versus future. Still good. Aluminum and metal cans, tin cans, those are still looking good. Prices into the future. Corrugated cardboard. Corrugated cardboard is the, I'll call it 2-layer with a wavy material in the middle of it. That's still good. Number 1 and number 2, plastics. Currently good. Good through the rest of this year. The reason I put a question mark on it is we are starting to hear that there may be changes, more changes coming from China in 2019, but that's a ways away yet. So we'll kind of have to wait and continue to see how that shakes out. Definitely a no-go from this point forward is the fiberboard. That's all other paper products. Cereal boxes, food boxes of various types, office paper, newspaper, magazines, junk mail, everything in that category. The problematic aspect is, as noted by Marty, that's over 34% of our current recycling stream. So I did put together a few options on
One second, Sharon.
Yep, sorry, Chuck.
Just before she gets into the options, the main reasons we wanted to take a look at these options and present them to you is because of the situation now where well over 50% of what's been going into our recycle bins is not really of any value anymore to recycle. And as such, there is an operational component to that. Should we be sending out our trucks every week to pick up half of the material that we're already picking up now? And as a result, if not, then we probably should be reducing our recycling pickup at least in half. So I asked staff to develop a few options to go over with you and think about, and then we can try to cost those out a little better and try to implement them next fiscal year.
So what you're saying is you're giving us options and it hasn't been costed out?
Not completely costed out
Okay.
yet, but they should make some sense in terms of what we're presenting, though.
Well, Chuck, just to be clear, I think at the end of all of this, once we get done talking and working through this, what we're really looking at is that negative, the $770,000 liability to the enterprise fund. And we've got to find a way to bring that as whole as possible, and we can figure out the other pieces as we go.
That's right. In terms of what Dave presented and what Marty presented, your overall rate that you charge your customers is a function of the landfill tipping fee, which includes all the costs associated with hauling, with everything that goes on at the transfer stations, with operating the landfill, all those kind of things, plus our component, which is the pickup, and taking to the transfer stations. So we have those two cost factors.
And personnel costs.
And that includes all, our associated costs that are involved in that. So what we want to do, obviously, is stop the losses in the enterprise fund while we're still running a positive fund balance. But we also, if we can also help reduce costs on the county side of the equation with how we're operating, that can help keep the landfill tipping fee stable and our rates more stable too. So it's a function of all those things.
Okay, so option A, I won't read every detail of it to you, but I'll call this one more of a wait-and-see approach option. It basically retains the current schedule with reducing what we put into the blue bin, so that paper board at 34%, but Basically, this will retain our current, what we call the 1-in-1 recycling schedule. So one refuse and one recycling pickup per week.
But the paper would have to go into the garbage.
Correct.
Okay.
And along with that, if you look at the operational impact, the reduction in the acceptable recyclables, some people may need a larger trash container if they are a high paper generator and they currently have a 65-gallon bin. They may need to go up to a 95-gallon bin because more is going into the garbage.
So I guess my first question is, and this is a carryover from where we were going before, so if 34% of our current recyclables is paper, which can't be recycled, and now that's going into the garbage bin and not going up to Tucson at the $50 transportation fee, is the movement to put all that paper into the garbage, is that enough to keep our current rates where they're at? Because we're essentially offsetting 34% of the cost, as it were, of tonnage from going up, and now it's just going straight to the landfill, theoretically.
Yep, that's true, but I don't think that it's enough to offset, the proposed rate increase.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. Option B is to reduce the recycling schedule from 4 pickups per month to 1 or 2 per month. Important points on this slide, the operational impact. We did a brief study of our blue bin set-out rate. It is about 51%. So any given Thursday, Friday, about 50%, about half the bins are out. The trash set-out rate on Monday, Tuesday is much higher. I didn't get a specific number on that, but just off the top of my head, I would say over 80% of trash bins are out on any given day, whereas only 50% of blue bins, which tells us that people may not need, even with the current stream of recyclables, they may not need weekly recycling pickup. So this would shift some of the current blue bin days on Thursday and Friday to green bin days is the easiest way to say it. Undetermined at this point if it would be 2 recycling pickups per month or 1 recycling pickup for a month. The potential challenge of this option may be confusing for some customers. I would expect that when we run the trucks and it's a blue bin day, we're still going to see green bins out there. It'll be more difficult for customers to keep track of what they're supposed to put out, whereas right now they know Monday, Tuesday, green, Thursday, Friday, blue.
And the other thing related to that is while this option may make some sense given the current situation and the fact that there won't be as many recyclables in the future if you choose to go in that direction, is that the trucks are still out on the street. So you're not seeing a tremendous amount of operational savings, at least on our end. Now, in terms of at the transfer station and what happens when that gets there, the waste stream will be much more smoothed out. There won't be the spikes on Monday and Tuesday that they're currently seeing and processing at the transfer station, and then all the trucks associated with hauling then the refuse to the landfill. So there is the potential savings on the system side in terms of operations at our transfer station by going to a smoother refuse pickup in terms of twice a week.
All right, and then the last option I have for you today, option C, this would be twice per month, or it could also be once per month, recycling pickup on what we currently call our special pickup day, which is Wednesday. So we would move recycling off of Thursday, Friday, put it on a Wednesday, either once or twice per month, and then we would go back to green bin pickup, our old pickup schedule, basically Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, refuse pickup. The major downside of this is this actually adds routes. All of the current recycling routes would convert to refuse routes, and then we would establish new recycling routes on Wednesdays. So this actually adds routes to our system. And the question is, well, how does this help? This, I think, would be a little bit less confusing for customers. There would still be an adjustment period, obviously, that they have to go through, but putting recycling on a different day, we wouldn't have the potential for green bin, blue bin, blue bin going down the street. And then also, by continuing to offer recycling services to people, they may not need to have the larger bin that I referenced in option A, possibly. So this one has some strengths as well, but the major drawback of this one is the added routes to the system. And that is all I have for you.
Comments? Yeah, well, I got a couple of questions, if I can go ahead and start. Couple things that are indicated. Anytime we do a change, we're gonna have an education, public awareness piece. And if one of our focuses is now going to be how clean our recycling stream is, one of the things we need to make sure that the public understands that is that when they have their obviously a metal aluminum pop can is pretty clean, but your can of beans that has a label on it, we need to remove the label, tuck the lid inside, crush it, and put it in a, probably rinse it out, and probably put it in the bin ahead of time. Same thing with defining what actually corrugated boxes are. I think you made a good description where it's got the wavy thing in there. It's either sandwiched or by itself. It's got the wavy piece of cardboard in there. Because some people look at shoe boxes and say, well, shoe box has cardboard, but it may not fit that definition. So we need to be able to explain that. And just like the 2-liter bottles, we got to take off the label because that's a number 1 or number 2 that goes in there, and people need to be able to identify that little triangular symbol and know what that is. The other thing that's important about the education, I think, you know, I'm leaning toward option B when I look at this. And again, we don't have the cost figures, so we'd like to see cost figures, I'm sure, on all these things. But again, there's an education piece to that. I think our people are smart enough to figure out that if we're doing the green bins on the Monday, Tuesday, and we're only doing the blue bins on the first and the third weeks of a month, then we may be able to save some operational costs that way, and they can figure that out. But again, that's an education piece that needs to be done once we get it decided, and that those options need to be costed out to come back to us for the next discussion, so we understand exactly where we're saving money, whether it's our enterprise fund is saving money or whether it's the county system saving money. We need to be able to understand that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll give you my comments, Mayor. And I'm not sure which of the options. I do tend to agree that option B, pending any sort of a cost realization, would be there. But here's my bigger concern. I realize we're kind of reacting to a global market shift. We're a seller without a buyer at this point for quite a bit of the recycling, and then it's problematic to get the recycling up and then shift it all out to get it to the people who actually are willing to buy it. I think that we have to look at these types of issues at a much, much larger level and see how integrated they all are. And I'll try to be brief, but let me kind of break down my concerns. I don't think that our economy is quite that strong, and I think that there's a lot of other fees and tax raises that could be coming up that we're also going to have to account for. I think it's getting better, but anything that starts to hiccup it is going to hurt. If we raise fees, even if it's just a little bit anywhere, I think that that's money that's not going out into the, to retail. It's not going to bar and restaurant. It's just not. It's going to offset the cost of paying for garbage. I won't get into what the state and the county and the Cochise College and all them are doing, but I think there's more tax raises and stuff coming up. So we're just adding to it. Here's what I think we could do. Now, one of the good things about this being kind of a global problem is, as you stated, and I agree with you, there's a lot, every city in the United States is affected, most of the cities in Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera. I've been reading a lot about what they've done, some of the things that the cities have done, because we're talking about that total liability that we have to kind of approach. I would say that one of the things that we do, I don't think we can get away from a fee increase, but one of the things we do is we look at how much printing and how much paper we use as a city government. So if there's anything there that is considered extraneous for the next couple years, that just goes away. And I know that we can probably go down through the budget and find that out. And if not, the problem is it's going to get used, even if it's a handout, and it's going to end up right back in the garbage and go right back out to a landfill somewhere, and it's not going to get recycled either. So I think we as a city move away from as much printing and paper usage as possible. I think also what I read with a couple other cities were doing, especially out along the West Coast, they were partnering with industry immediately, and they were, for example, for plastic bags, they were going right to the big box stores, the grocers, and they were asking them, can you set up a box in order to throw the plastic bags in so that they can recycle them with their own. Same thing with print media, and the same thing with manufacturing with, you know, aluminum. But the first goal is to find out, is there anybody around here who would take that on? And what they were doing is they were setting up basically stations where you drop that specific stuff off like we do with glass, and then that would go straight to that industry partner, and then they would take it, and it doesn't have to go to the dump, and it doesn't have to go up through our recycling. So essentially it leaves to the house, goes to that drop-off point. We don't have to worry about it. That'll reduce costs.
And I'll just share with you that my understanding is Target does some materials already.
There's a lot
and
of it. We just have to
that's something
identify.
that's something we could make a little money on.
Yeah, however we can work it out.
But if they're doing it all, yeah.
And I believe Walmart currently offers plastic bag
Yeah,
recycling.
I think there's a few others, but I don't want
few
to.
others.
Yeah.
But I think these are holistic parts to get that 750,000 in control, maybe control the fees, and still do the right thing with the environment in a holistic picture. I realize the market's cyclic. I'll hold up on that note. Here's the other thing, and this may be something we can't do this year, but is something that I would ask for us to go back and consider. Again, I'm not trying to be anti-government or anything like that. I'm trying to figure out how to control costs, and I don't see these costs as going down. I would still ask for us to consider and go back and look and not completely privatize waste management. What I'm simply suggesting what we may want to consider is to look at something like a firm fixed price, lowest price, technically acceptable contract that the city would maintain, and then basically put that out to industry to bid on, and then we can get an idea of how much somebody would want to bid to take over that kind of work. And I know it's scary for some, but it could help move some people off of the city payrolls, move pensions out of the way over the next couple years, and do some things like that. But since we get to control the pricing, because it would be a contract with us as a city government, then what we could do is ensure that we don't run into a problem where people are artificially inflating the market. That is something to consider, and I think it's a good idea, but we'd have to do some work to figure out what that would look like as a procurement vehicle. And I think all of those things would be beneficial to help bringing us back in with the 770,000 while keeping our prices low.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the research you've already done, and I know there's a lot more we can do. One of the comments I wanted to make around this whole process is including the public in some of the decision-making. You know, a lot of heads are better than just a few, and I'm thinking that the possibility of us opening up some kind of a response from the public, maybe through our Facebook page or some other way, where the ideas can start flowing of what do people see as positive moves. Now, I understand the nature of this is something we don't have a lot of control over, but as Craig pointed out, there are some things as a community we can do that can make a big difference. So that's my comment about that, and I think if council agrees that perhaps there's some input we can get that would be beneficial for us over the next few years. I mean, the comments now, but some ways we can do things over the next few years to make a real difference and a change in the process of how we do what we do. So we'll see if we get any feedback on that. Also, I was just thinking about how clean or dirty our recycling is, and I thought I had visited out at that, what do you call the place where we take our recycling? Not the landfill, but the transfer station. I thought we were having a lot of picking and throwing away things, and I thought that was happening at the recycling station.
They do some of that, don't they, Marty?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Calhoun, we do pull some material out of the waste stream, and we have balers at each one of our 6 sites, where when we bring material in that is recyclable, we'll take that and bale it, and then we'll market it. And when we have that clean recyclable, we can market it. When we commingle it and bring it all together, it's very difficult to market. And the only thing we can do is take it up to Tucson.
Oh, so if we had separate, this one for the 1s, this one for the 2s.
It would still be very difficult, but that's kind of the way the city of Bisbee does it.
Yeah.
They have everything separated. And they have very moderate success, but they're in a little bit different area than we are right now because we do commingle.
So there's a lot to consider when we look at what kind of changes we'll make.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're not looking for any kind of a decision. I know this is a work session. Is there a 30-day period on this?
That's the next thing is, Chuck, we need to know what the next steps are. If you're done.
I think that's about it.
That's kind of the.
Yeah, a lot will depend on what next steps.
Unless there's somebody else who's got other discussion points, next, we need to go through what the next steps are, Chuck.
All right, well, first, I want to say, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we intentionally left 2 options off. One would be to just continue recycling like we are. Given the cost increases and uncertainty of the market, we determined to leave that one off. And the other was to simply not recycle at all, which may be the best route financially, but probably maybe not the one the public would necessarily want us to pursue. So those 2 items were left off as options. Basically, what I seem to be hearing is a tendency to move towards option B. I will then ask staff to try and cost out what that is, and obviously this will be part of the budget work sessions that come up. But I think in a couple weeks at your next regular work session, and I think it would be 3 weeks, we should have that information available, and we can put that on the agenda for further discussion.
Okay. Mr. Mayor,
Sir.
One request. Can we at least get an idea when you're going through, and if you're going to cost out B, can council also get how much the city is spending on paper, printing, publications, things like that? Maybe we can find some efficiencies there. Hey, I don't want to just raise fees without showing up with something else that we can find something. I mean, we print a ton of stuff. I don't know if it's now maybe the time to kind of curb back on some of that, given where we're at. It's just going to show up and it's just going to go to the dump anyways. It's sooner or later.
That's true.
Well, hopefully later.
You should be able to do that just from an audit in the budget, I would think. Last year, the current year's budget, you get at least a ballpark figure. What we spend on printing.
Yeah, I think
It's line item there.
internally.
It's on in each department. It has a line item for it.
Yeah, I know.
Internally, we can take a look in doing that. I don't know what the savings would be, but
But again, I think Craig has a point. We need to be part of the budget discussion at least. If there are techniques where we can avoid costs by printing materials and spending more things on the net, I think that's important. I realize there are some things we do have to have physical copies of under the law, but again, we just need to review. I think it's a good idea to review that and see where we stand.
for us, it would be from the standpoint of taking a leadership position in terms of how that, relates and what, we can hopefully help make the public aware of in terms of what they can do as well to assist in this situation. Our savings in and of itself isn't going to, really move the needle in terms of rates or anything like that.
It's an example.
Yes.
Is what's important. Okay. Anything else? All right, seeing nothing else before the council. Marty, thanks very much for being here. Meeting's adjourned. And thank you, Environmental Affairs Commission members, for being here too.